Denver Broncos running back Jaleel McLaughlin is one player whose stock rose after Sunday's win against the Indianapolis Colts to open up the preseason. We'll highlight his impact while shedding light on some potential concern and questions with other running backs in that position room. All on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, credentialed Broncos reporter through Mile High Sports, covering the team in person in Dove Valley every day, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, longtime site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com, does written stuff there for NFL Spin Zone as well, covering more than just the Denver Broncos. And really on today's episode of the show, it is our stock report. And we're going to be monitoring things relatively closely here for the next couple of weeks as the roster starts to shape out and Sean Payton looks to build his 53. We'll take a look at players to watch this week as the Broncos gear up for a matchup against the Green Bay Packers. We'll highlight Riley Moss, why his stock is on the rise defensively after Sunday's preseason game. We'll highlight a couple of players whose stock may have fallen as well. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, one of the key standouts in Sunday's game. His stock rose exponentially, but there are some concerns here, I think, with some other players at that position inside the running back room, and we'll break all that down here. So I want to say thanks once again. If you're an everydayer here of the podcast, make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Check out FanDuel.com for more information, especially as the NFL season kicks up one step further. Sayre, really kicking things off here with our offensive emphasis. We're going to go through our stock report, stock up, stock down, definitely kicking things off here, I think, with our stock up. Jaleel McLaughlin, in my opinion, probably was the most impressive player from start to finish in Sunday's preseason game against the Colts. And really loved what we've seen from him. As some people have had questions about the running back room, Jaleel really leaves no questions when it comes to his performance and his play.
Yeah, he's an exciting player, and he's somebody that I think the Broncos are going to be able to rely on quite a bit this year. We saw him get some more work in between the tackles in this game. Ultimately, 7 carries for 30 yards, a respectable 4.3 average. And we saw him get that big reception from Bo Nix on the wheel route that, was set up really nicely by Devon Vele as well, running his kind of pick or rub route, whatever he was doing out there. 2 catches for Jaleel, 26 yards there, including that long of 22. We also saw him getting involved on special teams, right? Not only as a kickoff returner where he had a 21-yard return, but also on kick coverage. We saw him stand in there during pass protection at times. We know that's been a question mark that Sean Payton has addressed this offseason by saying, like, look, you're not going to have him in there for every pass blocking rep or every pass protection rep, but there are times that he's going to have to do it and stick his face mask in there and hit somebody. And we saw him do that against the Colts. So to me, Cody, it was kind of an underrated performance. You and I were talking off the air just a little bit ago. Like, I almost forgot that he had such a good game because we're so focused on the quarterbacks and watching the cornerback battle develop and other areas of this team. I almost just kind of expected Jaleel to look good in this game. And I think he was better than what most people maybe anticipated.
Yeah, I would say, like, when we talk about stock up at the running back position, I think he and Tyler Beatty, their stock rose from week 1 of the preseason. And I think Beatty's had a very underrated camp. Probably hasn't been talked about as much as he should, but we've even seen, like, when Tyler Beatty touches the ball, the good things tend to happen. He had the 11 good vision, the 11-yard touchdown run he had. I think we sometimes forget his first ever touch in the NFL went for a touchdown against the Los Angeles Chargers a couple of years ago. So, Beatty's a guy who's been stacking, and look, he's also playing a lot of special teams as well. So I like what I've seen there. Some other stock up. Look, we'll give Zach Wilson some props here. And look, I don't want to say it's just, hey, you hope he can play that way against third string guys, because that certainly is the reality. You hope he can. But I just felt like he operated the offense well. I thought he got the ball out of his hands quickly. I thought he was decisive with it. And he protected. He didn't put the ball into harm's way. So that was, something we should applaud there. We have so many players to get through here because we're also got to talk about stock down. But I want to highlight there because you mentioned it there. I'm going to give Devon Vele a little bit of a stock up as well. he had a catch or two. He drew the pass interference. That was obviously nice there. But I felt like the play that you mentioned to free up Jaleel McLaughlin on that wheel route, I'm going to give that kind of like the grinder play of the game. Like the one thing that's like, okay, hey, you see it and you're like, like nice play there by Jaleel. But it's made possible by Devon Vele, very smart body positioning, not running his shoulder into a guy, but kind of like setting a pick in a sense, like a DB is going to have to run through him, but not in a way that it's illegal. That's a smart play there by Vele. I loved what I saw there. We talked about Damarri Jacobs really looking like the best offensive lineman so far in the game. I think on the rewatch, I was impressed with number 71. So for him, stock continuing to rise. But it kind of transitions to what I teased here at the opening of the show. Stock down here. There is some concern, in my opinion, about a couple of other running backs on the Broncos roster whose stock, in my opinion, dropped a little bit following Sunday's game.
Well, it starts with Samaje Perine, right? Obviously, the tipped ball that was intercepted by Kenny Moore is a mistake that you can't have from the veteran of the group, and certainly somebody who's fighting for a roster spot. I mean, we talk about stock up for Jaleel McLaughlin. He's not going anywhere. He's not getting cut this offseason. Javonte Williams, he's not getting cut. And Audric Estime, he's not getting cut. So you're going to have to force the team to keep an additional running back, and you can't have plays like this. After last year, Cody, I think underrated, although it didn't really come up all that often because I think Samaje made so many big plays in the Broncos winning streak as a receiver. He kind of got away with a number of fumbles last year, in my opinion. So I think that ball security is a bit of an issue for him and could continue to, I don't know if that domino effect happens there. I think also at the running back position, in terms of ball security, Blake Watson, you're going to learn from these things, but dropping a kickoff opportunity as well as fumbling when he got the chance to be a ball carrier in this game against the Colts, those are mistakes that you certainly can't have. I know we're not trying to ignore Audric Estime's fumble that was returned for a touchdown either, but there's just a bit more pressure on guys like Perine and Watson who feel like they're on the roster bubble. And so that's where I think their stock is down for me, Cody. Give me your thoughts on that, as well as we've got Michael Bandy, the wide receiver. I thought he kind of an underwhelming punt return opportunity out there. That was really the only time we saw him. And Matt Peart, who I think was probably the worst O-lineman for the Broncos in this game. Those are the other two guys that I have on or that we have on stock down here. What are your thoughts on those running backs as well as those two other players that we just mentioned, Bandy and Peart?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely as it pertains to Perine. As a veteran player, you love the impact that he can provide, right? But, what is one thing that Sean wants to get out of the offense? It's those mistakes. It's turnovers. It's things that are preventable in a sense. And look, his lead bobble interception was 110% on him. It's not on Jarrett Stidham. And you can't have that. Like, there were too many instances where something like a good play would happen for the Broncos, and then something like that last season would just all plague the offense, and then things will go downhill from there. Blake Watson, I mean, you mentioned the two balls on the ground here in this game. He's also put the ball on the ground a couple of times during practice. And so that's not going to buy you favor here for Sean Payton. Now, I think people are like, well, what if he doesn't make it to the practice squad? I think that there's always a fear every year that a certain player may not make it back to the practice squad, whereas the reality is the demand and the sample size around the entire NFL with 31 other teams having 90-man rosters and going through cuts, the likelihood of him coming back on the practice squad is pretty significant at this point. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. I think you can stash him. I think that'll probably be the reality. Matt Peart, agreed with you. I didn't like the reps that we saw. And look, you brought him in as a veteran offensive tackle. Ideally, you brought him in to be that first offensive tackle behind Garrett Bowles. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking after watching that game, and I think he's had an underwhelming training camp just from my observation. Look, I'm certainly not an offensive line guru. There might be things that he's doing well that I may not just be privy to in a sense, but I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on offensive line play. I just see the physical standpoint where he got manhandled a few times. He's had a couple of penalties during training camp practices in terms of false starts. Just that's not a good start. So maybe he needs a bounce back week this week, especially with Damarri Jacobs' stock rising the way that it has. Matt Peart was very underwhelming, so his stock's going to be down. And after having, you mentioned Michael Bandy, after having a great training camp where primarily he's catching passes from all three quarterbacks, didn't see much of him inside the offense. You mentioned the punt return there. Definitely not like the guy I don't think you want having return punts. I think he also be a practice squad player for Denver, obviously coming into the regular season as well. I mean, obviously Joe Lombardi values him, a lot in many ways. And look, he's a grinder. He does a terrific job in practice, but is he going to be a guy that's going to impact you in the regular season? Probably not. So stock down in terms of that. And look, Broncos Country, eager for your thoughts on our stock report, stock up, stock down. Who did you have for yours? Make sure you let us know as you listen or watch Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast. But we're going to look at the defensive side of the ball now. While there have been some questions and some social media speculation about Riley Moss, his stock has risen, and there were some things that stood out about he and Damarri Mathis in Sunday's game that give us a little bit of comfort at the cornerback position. Certainly up for debate. We'll break all that down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And look, summertime is almost over. The fall is on the horizon, and you know what that means. That means that the NFL season is here, while the MLB season is still in full swing. The Denver Broncos host the Green Bay Packers this week at Empower Field at Mile High for week 2 of the NFL preseason. And Denver, they are 7-point home favorites against the Packers, who aren't anticipated to play much of their starters in this week's game. We also have Bo Nix getting his first career start here in the National Football League in the preseason. 7-point home favorites. Bo Nix, the momentum growing there. That might be something you get involved with here on FanDuel Sportsbook, and also take advantage of the bonuses, because FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
The good news for the Denver Broncos is Riley Moss's stock appears to be on the rise, but a potential starter at the inside linebacker position. We got some questions about Jonas Griffith after that first preseason game against the Colts. We're talking stock up and stock down for the Denver Broncos defense after that Colts preseason game here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And Broncos Country, you know that your boys, Sayre and Cody, we're going to be here for you every single day. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where you want to be, because you can watch the show. You can see my background change. You might see one of Cody's pets. You never know when the practice notebook is going to come out. So you just got to subscribe, hit subscribe. And for your second listen, you know what you got to do is check out Locked On Fantasy Football, that podcast over there. They're getting you ready for your fantasy football season, whether you're a dynasty player or a redraft player. You can find all the tips and tricks that you need for your draft upcoming here this season. Let's talk some stock up and stock down for the Denver Broncos defense after this game. Cody, I was really encouraged after a rewatch or two. And yes, I'm one of those sickos that watches the preseason games multiple times after it's over. And I know many of you listeners out there are too. So you know what? We're going to be sickos together in this. But I really was encouraged by the starting defense. And I think that a number of different things stood out. Number one was the play of I think Riley Moss at the cornerback position. This was a major focus for us after training camp, as well as this being arguably one of the most important position battles on the roster. Cody, you're the DB here. You're the expert. Give me your takeaway on Riley Moss from this game. I feel like both he and Damarri Mathis should have had maybe a picks off of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, no, I was very impressed on my rewatch. And look, I love that the NFL, at least they did it so far here in the preseason, the All-22 was out in 24 hours. So I was able to watch it, do my film breakdowns, obviously on Twitter. I can't post them on YouTube, folks, but you can check them out on Twitter and Threads and everything like that. Damarri Mathis, Riley Moss, I felt like did a really good job. And they were put in several situations. Looking, they're going against, we didn't hear it, their names called enough, but like, you're going against a really good receiving core there. You're going against sizable tight ends. You're going against Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield. And I felt like Denver's communication from the secondary, and it stemmed with Damarri and it stemmed with Riley, they did a really good job because they faced a lot of those condensed formations where it's stacked. You have twins or trips, and it's close to the offensive tackle or the tight end. That way, I mean, you can have vertical breaking routes, in breaking routes, out breaking routes. And look, there's times where you're in man coverage, you're in zone coverage. And I felt like overall their communication was good. I felt like alignment was good. But more importantly, you saw them making plays on the football. Damarri Mathis had a couple of plays where he went across the entire field and made a play. Should have had an interception. You know, he's going to want that one back. Riley Moss almost had one as well. And so it's like the ball was going in their areas, but they were there. They were making plays. That, I think, is a very promising sign from what we saw. And granted, you mentioned the starting defense. Sayre, it's also crazy to think we didn't see PS2 in this game. We didn't see John Franklin Myers or Zach Allen. You really saw, okay, hey, it was DJ Jones, Angelo Blackson, and then Jordan Jackson getting the start there initially at defensive line. So I came away thoroughly impressed with those guys, and you want to continue to see them build. And I'll even throw another defensive back in there. I came away impressed with Chris Abrams-Drain. I did a film breakdown. He was on the outside against this receiver. He did a good job jamming the receiver. The receiver had an outside release vertically, and he stayed stride for stride with him, not getting in phase just yet, but staying, monitoring, mirroring his hip. He saw the receiver throttle down. He throttled down with him, got his hand across the hip, forced him out of bounds, incomplete, 2-point conversion, interception. Chris Abrams-Drain's playing with a lot of confidence. He's someone that stood out to me. Now, I got to ask you as well, as we look here on the defensive side, who are some other players that stood out to you whose stock rose after Sunday's preseason game here against the Colts?
Well, you watch some of what Malcolm Roach and Jonah Ellis were able to do in this game. I know I've seen a lot of clips floating out there from Broncos fans that were really excited to see what Malcolm Roach was going to bring to the table as a run defender. I think we saw him do some serious stacking of offensive linemen and getting into the backfield and helping make plays. That was something the Broncos really lacked last year. I think in abundance, we can see the upgrade of talent on the defensive line, and we haven't even got to see Ioma Uwazurike out there yet. And it sounds, from what I understand, Cody, sounds like he really hasn't skipped a beat since being suspended last year. Sounds like he was looking good in practices last week. So excited for that. But Malcolm Roach, a big addition to this team, literally, and in terms of what he brings to the table as a run defender. But Jonah Ellis, we see the pressures. You see the consistency. You've got this bat out of hell now off the edge who definitely proved that, I think, upon second and third watch, of just being that kind of, it's not like he's out of control, but the Tasmanian devil type thing that's like, if he can't beat you with speed, he's going to beat you with a spin, or he's going to beat you with power, or he's going to do whatever it takes to get to the football. Just relentless in pursuit. So I was really encouraged by Jonah Ellis and Malcolm Roach, for that matter. So the Broncos defensive front getting an upgrade this offseason. And feel free to give me your thoughts on that, Cody, as we transition to the stock down as well. I think there was a number of players that stood out for negative reasons in this game, but give me your thoughts on Malcolm Roach, and then take us into maybe the stock down portion of today's show.
Yeah, Malcolm Roach, you can tell he brings the energy. He's a fun player to watch, very physical at the point of attack. I think does a really good job of being able to strike and then move laterally, right? Like, while still being able to drive guys back, he moves laterally at an effective pace. He was one of the best run stoppers last year in terms of efficiency, TFLs, and from an interior lineman standpoint. And I'm excited to see him combined up in a rotation with JFM, Zach Allen, and even the other guys, Angelo Blackson. I think that they can really build out a really good second unit behind those starters there. You got a little bit of a glimpse in that in this game. Stock down, very interesting. Part of me is wondering, like, okay, we can look at this from multifaceted. I put a tweet out there, Sayre, during the game. I said, I'm very excited to see the combination of Lavelle Bailey and Jonas Griffith on the field, the inside linebacker at the same time. Didn't see anything that stood out. And look, that's not necessarily a bad thing right away, but I think it's more of a comfort thing. And I know Jonas Griffith, it was his first game back in almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give Jonas a little bit of grace here. I think the expectation is that he's going to start this week next to Alex Singleton, because Barton got the week 1 start. So you're going to see as though that position battle kind of shapes out. Now that he's got maybe that first game out of the way, how does he respond? But it was a little bit of an underwhelming performance there by those two linebackers. Obviously, that we've had a little bit of a promise on during training camp. Want to see a little bit more from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And those guys, what we saw from Alex Singleton, I think is unfair to expect from every linebacker out there, because he's flying around the field. But you do want to see these guys confidently making plays, especially if the D-line is getting a push up front. But I guess maybe that could be kind of the question mark here, because Cody, when Matt Henningsen, Elijah Garcia, when those guys were out on the field late in the game, kind of felt like that was when the Colts started to move the ball a little bit more consistently offensively. So I'm really questioning, are those guys going to be able to crack this roster? Certainly practice squad candidates, as those guys may be better when they're with the first team defense, but those guys are players that I would say, hey, they needed to have a bounce back week as well. Matt Henningsen, Elijah Garcia. I actually thought Jordan Jackson did a pretty good job. And somebody commented on one of our episodes that, hey, that interception from Keidron Smith, that was actually Jordan Jackson getting there first. It was about a tie between he and Jonah Ellis there as rushing the passer, but an impressive rep from Jordan Jackson. So good call there from whoever commented that. Sorry, I don't have it.
I think it was Josh on YouTube. I think his name was Josh. Yeah.
Shout out Josh if that was you. So
someone with a J.
Someone with the J. Hey, whoever you are, you nailed it there. That was good. And maybe it was Jordan Jackson himself, Cody. I don't know. And he's saying like, "Hey, look at me. Look, I made the play." But another question mark that I had from this really quickly, PJ Locke missing the tackle on Mo Alley Cox. That stood out to me on the second watch. I'm like, man, he was right there,
Yeah.
able to make the play. That was a potential missed opportunity there, as we've had some questions about that safety position.
Yeah, just got to, on that one too, I saw that. I was going through my film review on it. Just got to take a better angle. We kind of talk about you take like a banana peel angle on it, right? Because, okay, if he's inside, what he's going to sit, catch the ball, probably try to spin to the outside, which is exactly what he did. You even talk about that sometimes you do that same exact thing. Like they tell you on the outside spin, hey, if it's there, spin inside because that guy might be trying to use that sideline to use you. You might be able to get a track inside. So just a better angle on that from PJ. I felt like didn't see a lot from JL Skinner, in a sense from what I wanted to see. And look, maybe that's just, hey, first game, you'll see more action this next game. Tremont Smith stock down, in my opinion. I mean, you look at several of the big passing plays that happened in this game. It was with Tremont Smith, either in coverage, not sure if it was zone or man, but the one guy that was there, and I'll go back and watch, but it wasn't ideal. And we know Tremont's not going to offer too much at cornerback for you, but special teams wise, you're going to get a ton out of it. But with the young guys stepping up, especially on special teams, it could put Tremont Smith's roster spot maybe in question as training camp and preseason progress here. But look, Broncos country, preseason continues this week. The Green Bay Packers come to town for joint practices, then a preseason game. We'll tell you which players, who specifically we have our eyes on in this game on Sunday. We'll highlight that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And when your schedule is packed with different activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to get overwhelmed and it's easy to let some of your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, sometimes it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever before. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past to help me deal with stress, anxiety, imposter syndrome, especially in this industry. That's something that I struggled with when I first got a full-time job on the Broncos beat. And on top of that, life comes with its own problems and things that come up. And that's where I needed to utilize BetterHelp therapy. And my therapist was great with me. We vibed really well. She helped me come up with tools that were going to help me that I still use to this day here. But if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's designed to be flexible and best of all, suited to your schedule to meet you where you're at. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll highlight why Jarrett Stidham is one of the key players we'll have our eyes on in Sunday's game against the Green Bay Packers. Everyone's going to be watching Bo Nix. That's not even a question, but why should Jarrett Stidham be a little bit under the microscope this week? Could we see more reps from him? That's something we'll dive deep into here today. Just want to say thanks once again, Broncos Country, for your time, for being everydayers and first listeners. If you're not an everydayer yet, make sure you become one so you never miss out on fresh, objective coverage of all things Denver Broncos related. All right, Sayre, week 2 of the NFL preseason is here. The Green Bay Packers come to town. Obviously, a very, very good team inside the NFC. After that Broncos game, it seemed like after Denver beat them, they went on a little bit of a run, right? Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple years ago, where the Broncos beat them in London. Then they went on a run at the end of the season. Jordan Love quickly emerged as like, oh, wow, this guy's a tremendous player. Obviously got a really good contract extension. Denver's going to be tested this week in joint practices. You're more than likely going to see Jordan Love versus the Broncos first team defense in practice. You're not going to see it necessarily in the preseason game. So if you're going to be out there at that joint practice, Broncos country, make sure you enjoy it. But who do we have our eye on this week as things kind of come to fruition here? Sayre, I'm going to start off with Jarrett Stidham. I think and I feel like Sean Payton, he definitely deserves more than 11 reps in a game, right? Especially if he's in that quarterback battle with Bo Nix. So part of me is thinking, okay, we're going to see Bo Nix start. Does Bo Nix get the first half and then Jarrett Stidham gets the third quarter, partway into the fourth, and then Zach gets the final parts? Like, I don't know how it's going to go out this week, but definitely think Jarrett Stidham should get more than 11 reps because of, what he's done, his experience. And I thought, when he was in, he did a really good job at the quarterback spot. The production or lack thereof wasn't necessarily his fault. So I want to see him a little bit more this week. He's a player to watch for me Who do you have your eyes on here in Sunday's game?
Well, depending on who, I guess, the Packers throw out there, and maybe it doesn't even matter because I saw in their first preseason game, like Lucas Van Ness was playing deep into the game. And so I think the Packers, they're going to be bringing the heat off the edge. And Jeff Hafley, their new defensive coordinator, is calling a lot of blitzes. And I think the Broncos offensive tackles in this game, and I'm specifically putting the microscope on Garrett Bowles and Mike McGlinchey for this game because we'll probably see them play similarly extended snaps here because this will be their, in all likelihood, this is what week 3 of the preseason used to be, right? This is kind of your final like dress rehearsal before the regular season. We'll see a lot of backups in the week 3. I guess I don't know exactly how that's going to go for the Broncos, but that's typically how it's been going now that they've condensed it to just 3 games. I think we're going to see extensive work from these 2 tackles, and they're going to have their hands full. If whether the Packers have Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith out there, or if it's, Cox Jr. and Kingsley Enagbare, I mean, they've got plenty of guys. Lucas Van Ness, no Hawkeye bias there. I mean, he's probably just going to be one of the best breakout defenders in the NFL this year, but I think that's going to give those guys a lot to handle off the tackle. So those are 2 players, Cody, especially after they both made unbelievably frustrating mistakes. I know that it's the preseason, but how annoying is it that McGlinchey had a false start? How annoying is it to hear holding 72 when you have limited preseason reps? Like, I expect better out of those guys, especially being 2 of the highest paid players on this team.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. And look, while you were talking about the Packers, I was thinking to myself, hopefully that one guy that found you on social media, because you write about the Packers and the NFL Spin Zone, hopefully he doesn't blow a gasket that you're talking about his team again. Like, only real ones know that. Social media is a crazy place. No, I agree with you. You expect more because they're veteran players. They're the number ones. They're the starters. And it's like they have to set the example for the guys behind them. You can't have these penalties. And look, hopefully you get it out in the preseason. But there have been some times in practice where McGlinchey's had a false start or has been early. And it's like, there was a reason, like Broncos fans came up with the nickname McFlinchy. Don't let that linger. Don't let that become your nickname here in 2024. I'm in agreement with you. You want to see them maybe bounce back a little bit. For me, I mentioned Jonas Griffith earlier. We talked about him as in stock down. I want to see what he looks like as a starter next to Alex Singleton. Now he's got his first game under his belt in 2 years, kind of like Tim Patrick. What is he going to carry over this week? And look, for me, I'm going to stick with the rookie here, Chris Abrams-Draine. I really liked what I saw from him. And look, not saying that, hey, he's going to be in line to be the cornerback too in anytime soon. But man, I think if there's an injury that happens at any point of the season, you can get some quality reps from him. I think he's been sticky in coverage. PJ Locke said it after the game. He's kind of been strappy, in the last couple of weeks. You could see the jump in his confidence level, something that Sean Payton has talked about, but just doing things from a technical standpoint the right way. I like what I've seen from Abrams-Draine. He'll play a lot of special teams this year. I feel like he can be a really good asset there. He could be the reason you actually do move on from a guy like Tremont Smith, because he is going to offer you the ability to play special teams and also play cornerback if need be. So he's a player that I have my eye on. You talk about some other players as well. We got to see, it's been quiet. It's been kind of nice though, but haven't heard anything bad about Greg Dulcich, right? Greg Dulcich has been healthy. He's been making it through practice. I know he was one of your players that you listed here to watch. Like, what is it you're looking forward to seeing here in week 2 of the preseason? Because it does seem like with the toe injury now to Lucas Kroll, we don't know the severity of it, considered day-to-day, apparently, according to Mike Kliss. But now it's just more of an opportunity for Greg Dulcich to say, hey, I'm healthy. I'm here. Here's what I can do.
Yeah, it's, to me, if this is the dress rehearsal game, this is the opportunity. I know we saw the Broncos kind of try to get Greg a couple of design plays to him in that preseason opener. I want to see a little bit more. Yeah, he did. He took a hard hit. And that's why I think I wrote an article, Cody, about the winners and losers from this game, as we have to do as the content mill churns. I put Dulcich and Tim Patrick as big winners for that reason, for going out there and taking big time hits. Like, I know that that's not necessarily been their problem, is taking hits. They've suffered some kind of freak injuries and injuries that are, Greg, it might just be running too fast for how big he is, with the hamstring stuff. So, but I think going out there, taking big hits, like, to me, that was great to see for Dulcich. Not that you want to see him get hit, but man, the physicality of the game isn't it's gonna rear its ugly head all season. So I want to see him take if it's a drag across the middle of the field, I want to see Greg Dulcich catch and run a little something. I want to see a little bit of that. I want to see him maybe make a play vertically like they tried to take that shot against the Colts. So I'm interested to see Greg. I also think, Cody, I'm going to switch up my last one. I had Cody Barton on there, but thinking about the Packers, their wide receivers, hearing you talk about Chris Abrams' drain, that wide receiver room for Green Bay might be the best in the NFL. When you're talking top to bottom, I mean, their 7th wide receiver, Grant DuBose, might be one of the top 4 best receivers on a lot of other teams in the league right now. So I just think that receiver room is going to pose a huge challenge all throughout the joint practices and this game for the Broncos secondary.
And look, I think the ultimate thing is, how do these guys respond? Look, we won't see PS2 play. I don't think he might play a couple snaps this week, but I think one thing we'll monitor is, how do you look against these receivers? Romeo Doubs, especially in practice. I think Friday's joint practice is going to give us a lot of clarity and insight. We might be able to look at our players to watch a little bit early this week, just in practice, just because you're not going to see the primary share of their best players overall in Sunday's preseason game. So with that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show as Sayre and I continue to deep dive throughout what's going on with this team this week. The Broncos on Wednesday are back on the practice field, and we'll take a look at what happened in practice. We'll take a look at standouts, the quarterback rotation, the biggest storylines, and more. Hopefully some injury updates on a couple of guys. Will Brandon Jones and Levi Wallace return this week? You can get updates on that and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.